Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Philosophical Liberal, where we are doing a deep dive into Article 2 of our statement. And this is one that is going to set up a series of discussions where we're thinking about what is the ideal, because that's part of what we are putting forth here. So this is going to be a really intriguing and exciting series of discussions because what is more important than thinking about the ideal way that we could live? I would make the argument that might just be the most important question one could consider. And as we've discussed in earlier episodes, the way that I at least think about this is I like to think about it with the metaphor of a jewel with different facets. And ultimately, there is one vision of an ideal that I believe we are putting forward here, but there are so many different ways of thinking about it. And the way we're going to start exploring today is this idea of the ideal as continuous betterment and why that is so important for human life and human flourishing and human greatness. But I will turn it over to my co-founder, co-host Chris, who will catch you up on what exactly we said about this concept in our statement, and then we'll start the deeper exploration.
Excellent. Thank you, Joia. And it's great to be on here. And yes, talking about another facet of, I loved that analogy you created of the jewel to describe our overall ideal of in philosophical liberalism. But to just be a little more specific for everyone out there who's listening, or if you're just jumping in and don't really know what we're referring to here, as you know, we are going through our statement on philosophical liberalism that's on our website, kind of our manifesto of what philosophical liberalism is all about. And on 1776forward.com, for those of you who haven't yet seen it and visited our website, please be sure to check that out and you will get caught up fully on everything we mean. But we just recently got through Article 1, in which we talk about an ideal there, the creator trader. We kind of even say that that is really the ultimate archetype of human nature at our best. And so now that we're moved into Article 2, which is the moral applications of human nature at our best, we now kind of reference another ideal, which we call continuous betterment. So today's discussion is around that one and diving into more of that because we covered creator trader back under Article 1. Be sure to check out those episodes on our Substack archives if you haven't yet. And so we're going to explore this question of why is continuous betterment the noble ideal? Why do we call it the noble ideal? And then we'll even touch upon what we see as an important link to entrepreneurship with this ideal of continuous betterment. But even to just kind of reset the stage on Article 2 here, we to recap, and if you haven't read it, we kind of, with all three of our articles in our statement, we open with a intro paragraph that's always kind of our painter's poem, capturing the essence and the spirit of what's to come in that article, the meat that's to come. And then we have kind of the substance, the core insights and key principles that are covered under that section. And then we kind of move into a kind of bridge or segue into the succeeding article that follows. So in Article 2, we as we when we went through the intro a couple weeks ago, we talked about how there's really three parts to it. We start with the noble ideal, continuous betterment, then we're going to talk about the virtues, and then we're going to talk about rights and how they're ultimately a bridge between kind of the Article 1 and Article 3. And so today we're talking about continuous betterment. And, I guess I'll just start by reading. So this is the first of those three parts that we're covering. And so I'll start by reading what we said, kind of go to the source material, and then we'll build out from there. So we kind of said, I'll start with the opening sentences in our intro, we said, tie to it directly, where we say, through the freedom to continuously actualize on our potential, human beings can achieve a noble ideal, a self-chosen life focused on growth and the development of a virtuous character. Autonomy is key. Ultimately, the freedom to think and to act is required to thrive as human beings. And then in our substantive bullet on this first part, the noble ideal, continuous betterment, we say the nature of life is to grow or to die. Human beings thrive by pursuing continuous growth in our capabilities across multiple domains, achieving both material and moral betterment along the way, i.e., the Renaissance human ideal. And so I know we use the word ideal there in a third instance, and we will cover that in the next episodes and make sense of it ultimately, all of it, these various facets of, if you will, every time we invoke the word ideal, they are facets of our one overarching ideal here under philosophical liberalism. But we'll put a pin in the Renaissance human point till next episode. So that's what we said on continuous betterment. So now let's try and unpack that and kind of what we mean. We covered autonomy in our most recent episode right before this one. We covered that autonomy piece that I read about, which really is an important intro into this concept of continuous betterment, and I'll kind of circle back to it. But when we just talk about continuous betterment, what do we mean by that? And we just mean that, I mean, it's kind of like we say through the freedom to continuously actualize on our potential, we you just inherently through that act, you are achieving a noble ideal of a self-chosen life focused on growth and the development of a virtuous character. And I think it's key. It was key on our part, and perhaps we didn't even fully grasp its significance at the time, but that we said both things because I think this is a key aspect of what does it mean to be continuous? What does continuous betterment mean for you as a person? It's that you're growing in your capacities, in your unique potential, actualizing your potential, and you're building yourself into a person of moral character, of virtuous action, and of life-serving values that you are pursuing and for which you need those virtuous actions in order to achieve. So, and both of those are ongoing projects and is what we mean when we say continuous betterment, that when we have freedom, we have the not only the opportunity to constantly work on both of those things, but it's almost built into the nature of life. Now, it is still a choice, and this is where the human faculty of volition comes into play, because obviously we know many human beings choose not to organize their life in pursuit of one or both of those values, growth and building a virtuous character. But I think we are going to argue that if you set out and make that choice to constantly improve your abilities and become a person of moral character and virtue, then it is just kind of inherent in the nature of life. So that's one thing. I also think if Article 1 was kind of, well, we say it's human nature at our best and was our effort to sketch out what is human nature at our best in our vision of philosophical liberalism, and then therefore why freedom flows from understanding that nature. You can kind of think of that as like and we mentioned this in a past episode, but the famous philosophical problem of the is ought question. Can you get an ought, which is a value statement about what someone should do, from an is, which is a kind of metaphysical and even scientific statement about what something is by nature. It's a long-running problem in philosophical ethics, and you got to start with the is to then determine the ought. And so that was, you could almost kind of think in a way was Article 1. And then I like to think that continuous betterment then is kind of our ought, that is once you know that being a creator trader and all of the other both and dualities of identity that we sketched out in Article 1, that those are part of what comprises human nature at our best, then you start to see how the question of, so what does this mean for me in my life? It starts to lead in a direction of pursuing continuous betterment, of living a life where you're constantly growing and improving and looking to stretch yourself and challenge yourself, and then also build a virtuous character. So I think that that even starts to put maybe the first two ideals that we've put forth, the creator trader and then can now continuous betterment, into combination with each other and juxtaposition against each other. Um, and I just, to build out on that, I feel like creator trader, another way to think of it is that the creator trader archetype that we started with, that because that falls under the kind of Article 1, human nature at our best, it speaks to kind of what our nature requires. So there's a universal aspect to it, and something, it's almost a little more impersonal. It really deals with, it's outwardly focused, how freedom and human nature, when combined, manifest for dealing with other humans, and what you must put out into the world. And that's what freedom allows and really requires. But continuous betterment, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. It's more inwardly focused, and it speaks to what freedom allows for you personally. Again, back to this question of, okay, it's great to know that we are beings of mind and body and reason and emotion and progress and order, and creating and trading and the like. But what does that mean for my life? And I think most people are self-interested and want to think about, okay, what should I do with my life? And continuous betterment is, again, that this is the facet of the jewel that we want to emphasize, that deals with that of what does it mean for your life. And this then, I think, nicely ties into the autonomy piece, because as we spent a lot of good time unpacking last episode, we talked about autonomy is the self-chosen life. And that, I think we made a case last week, or 2 weeks ago, why that is good and noble, because it's yours. And as we said, it's choosing a life that's directed at life affirming values. And so I would argue, and I think we both would argue, that that is just inherently noble. And then when you do that, when you start to have that autonomy, it again leads you in a direction of wanting to constantly grow. And that just then gets back to the statement we made in, or the sentence to open the bullet on continuous betterment, that the nature of life is to grow or die. So if those are kind of the two fundamental choices in life for any living being, certainly one that has choice like us humans, then you kind of don't have a choice if you want to live. You have to choose life, and life requires a process of constant growth, improvement, trial and error, learning, and those presuppose a lot of virtuous actions and habits and states of mind in order to maintain that. So that may sound like it's not really a choice, but you certainly have a choice. People can and do make the choice not to pursue a life of growth, and we see the results all the time, whether they ultimately just kill themselves through suicide, or they just kind of, through sloth and laziness and unproductiveness, just kind of waste away. That I don't think anyone would really seriously argue that those are kind of ideals to strive for, that they certainly optimize your life and your happiness. So that is kind of the choice is there. But I think you really have just kind of, the choice of life is inherently continuous betterment. And but rather than seeing that as kind of constraining, I like to think that um it's the ultimate empowerment, because it calls you to action, what choice to make to steer your life in ways that help you improve both materially and spiritually. So it's not only about choosing your path, but doing so in a way that takes on responsibility for building a productive, happy life of achievement and virtue. And And then to me, that just then answers the question of why is this ideal noble? Because I think the mere act of trying and putting forth effort to be better, to push yourself and grow is just inherently a good, commendable, even heroic enterprise. And it's certainly very enriching and makes you just through the act of learning, growing, pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, trying new things, gaining new skills, improving your flaws, working on your weaknesses, all of that by definition. So I will stop there. That is my treatise on the ideal of continuous betterment. And I'll just let you react and add on to that whatever you'd like to say, Joya.
I'd like to pick up and echo this idea that it really is a heroic act to choose to grow by emphasizing that in many ways it is the counterintuitive choice, or at least it's not the obvious choice, both I think for individuals and for society and humanity as a whole, that the choice to grow is not one that many humans have taken throughout history. So first, even on the individual level, I think there is a common, I would say, misperception among most people that the trajectory of a human life is something like you're born and you have this period of growth that lasts into adulthood. And then adulthood is maybe at best a kind of plateau with some incremental gains. And at a certain point, you retire and fall off the cliff and pass away. Fascinatingly,
Hmm.
science, neuroscience has emphasized this point that we really do have this capacity for growth throughout life. And this is
Hmm.
relatively recent. I mean, certainly when you and I were growing up, the common scientific understanding was that you couldn't, for example, regrow nerve cells or brain cells, that whatever
Hmm.
brain cells you had, that if you lost your brain cells, that was it. And that, you're
Ah.
just, you're on this path of senescence afterwards. I remember being a kid and there was this joke that like if you sneeze too hard, you don't want to do that because you're going to lose your brain cells and you're never
Yeah.
going to get those brain cells back.
Yep.
But recent science has proven that this is exactly the opposite case, that we have
Hmm.
this capacity to continuously grow new brain cells and really different kinds of cells, that we have this capacity for growth. And some of the studies have even been with people who are essentially in late stages of life, who are in palliative care and or who are approaching death, but before you actually hit death, there still is this opportunity to keep learning, to keep growing, to keep developing who you are as a human being. And like you, I think once you recognize that this is a possibility, it's an empowering possibility to recognize that you can make this choice and essentially take your life and your growth into your own hands. That however it was that you were born or what environmental conditions that you were born into that you had no choice about, that there's always this capacity to do better. There's always this capacity to grow from whatever point you are at into something that is better. And you pointed out that we emphasize two aspects. We talked about growth and virtuous character. And I would want to clarify that the way I see it, the latter one of these, the virtuous character, is an example of growth, but one that is so important that it deserves to be highlighted and separated out and emphasized. Because we're talking about growth, as you pointed out, we're talking about growth of knowledge, growth of skills, growth of capabilities, and virtue is that, but it is such an important one. And I think this is a significant point to emphasize as well, that virtue in itself is a journey. So the other metaphor that I love to use thinking about continuous betterment is thinking of your life as this journey that has this potential to be continuously moving in an upward direction, even if there are dips along the way, which perhaps is inevitable. And I think we'll get to that when we're discussing how this connects with entrepreneurship, that the failures sometimes are what propel the ultimate growth. But that as we're thinking about what a human life could be, that ultimately we want to see, even if the graph is somewhat going like this, we want there to ultimately be this upward trajectory, and that that is possible no matter where it is that you were starting from, and that this is true of your virtuous character as well, that whatever virtues you've hopefully already developed into your character, that there's always room to develop even more, to perhaps hone in on becoming more specific in what that virtue is, or to expand out to other virtues. We're going to have a whole conversation about virtues and the virtues that one can pursue, and that we think are relevant to philosophical liberalism. But as we'll discuss there, we identified 11 that we agreed were crucial to the project of philosophical liberalism. But even there, we had to hone in on 11. There could potentially be even more for philosophical liberalism, and there are certainly plenty more that one could pursue for a human life. So, again, always this possibility for growth for you as an individual. And I would mention too that unfortunately, I think we live in a society that valorizes youth in a way that has some relevance and merit, but unfortunately, we don't necessarily have as bright and benevolent a picture of old age as I believe we could and ought to have.
Hmm.
There sometimes is this view that you peak around age 24 or 25. And
Yeah.
even in common parlance, that older people today, like what do we say, like, okay, boomer, and like when you reach a certain age, you're just sort of irrelevant.
It's
It's the young people
dismissive.
who know what's going on,
Yeah.
who know all the technology, who are hip to what's happening, and that at a certain point, by the time you reach, and I don't even know what the age is supposed to be, but it's certainly somewhere on middle age to later, that you just sort of fall off the cliff of either knowledge or relevance, where certainly other societies have thought differently, have venerated elders in terms of the wisdom that they are accruing. And that I think definitely is consonant with this view of philosophical liberalism, that we see a kind of growing sum that you ought to have. And I think ours is even an empowering vision, because we see this capacity of growth, meaning that even as you get older, if there is some kind of decay that's possible, that there's all sorts of possibilities to essentially retain the best of the vigor of youth, but then have it fully blossom and fully flourish with just the expanded knowledge, capacities, skills, actualization of your potential and virtue that you develop over the course of a career. So hopefully this is a really inspiring ideal that we would ask you all to accept, a challenge to take on for your life. How can I continue to grow and to retain the best of my youth and just add all the glory of what additional years and learnings could bring to you? So that would be what I would want to say on an individual level. And I think then this tracks too on a society level in a way that, again, is not necessarily obvious. It certainly hasn't always been the norm. Certainly, there are various religions and other philosophical viewpoints that have thought that humans' best days, golden days, have been in the past, perhaps even in a prehistorical, mythical Garden of Eden kind of past, and that
Hmm.
everything from then is just a fall from whatever golden era you might want to think. There are certainly other views of human history. For example, in the medieval era, I know that the cyclical view of human history was more the norm, that there is this kind of, you're kind of a cycle of fortune and fall that the human beings are going through, which I think we have the benefit of now living post the Industrial Revolution and everything that we talked about, for example, in our episode on progress, to know that there is this different possibility for humanity as a whole. There is this possibility for humanity as a whole to be progressing, that as all the individuals, ideally, or most or more individuals are progressing individually, that we can raise humanity itself on this upward trajectory path. Again, not something that has been obvious or the norm for most of human history, but I think that once you recognize that and embrace that, hopefully can be an empowering challenge for what you can contribute to the world, that your growth can also be growth for humanity as a whole. I think that just beautifully dovetails with self-actualization, Maslow's whole idea that self-actualization and self-transcendence are essentially two halves of one coin, that
Mm.
what you want to do is to be continually on that journey of actualizing your potential, on that journey of becoming all that you are capable of becoming in service of delivering value to the world and humanity, having that grander mission that is your mission, self-actualization
Mm.
and self-transcendence, that you need
Mhm.
both of them, and that that is key to a flourishing life and a life of greatness.
Wonderfully put. And I think that even then, that's another way of kind of tying our two ideals that we've already discussed together, because in a way, it's kind of the creator trader is the way, and like I said, is the way you deal with the wider world. And the more you work on your own continuous betterment and self-actualization, the more you are able to bring to the table in trade with others to achieve that kind of self-transcendence level of a mission and an impact on the wider world around you that transcends just kind of your narrow self-interest and or kind of self-satisfaction. So so I love that. And I like also how you pointed out this point about that, how continuous betterment as an ideal, it's universal across ages. And if anything, I think it maybe by nature, well, the beauty of it is that it applies to everyone all the time, because a 20-year-old and a an 80-year-old can each be self-actualizing in their own ways at their own in their own point in life, and can be constantly growing and learning, but also have kind of achieved a certain level of self-actualization, and then it just continues. So, but I guess the you could argue that if someone was continuously self actualizing and transcending and just constantly achieving their best, but then still growing, learning new things, have building the accumulated experience of life and wisdom, that it just gets better and better. So there is a way in which continuous betterment as an ideal almost flips the score, so to speak, of value towards the later part in life. And I do think that you're right, that other cultures, certainly either around the world today and or in the past, um, prior cultures and civilizations definitely did, I think, value the older generations more so, relatively. So in a way, you could say philosophical liberalism provides a framework to reclaim value and reassert value for older generations. But I think the even more inspiring point to me is the one I just made prior, which is that it can apply equally to everyone at whatever, no matter what point in life you're at, because there's nothing inherently in continuous betterment that says, and the process of finding your unique abilities, building a moral character, and then sharing that with others in the world, that says that like you must cross through X number of years or Y number of lessons before you achieve it. Everyone can be doing it. It's what's the way to kind of describe it? It's like it's both a destination and a process at the same time. And so I think if you're inherently just engaged in the project of it, you kind of already are living up to the promise and potential of growth and character, but it's also obviously an ongoing, never-ending process as well. So um, I think that just is something like that just makes it is open to everybody. And so to me, that's super empowering.
The way I would see it is that there is no destination, which is part of the beauty of it. You never actually get there. You never really arrive. It's always a journey. But the way I would put it is that it's continuously a state of being and a process always at the
Yeah,
same
that's
time. So it's
better.
another one of those
Yeah.
beautiful both ends. To your point,
Hmm.
that you can be there doing it at whatever moment in time you are at, and also simultaneously in the midst of this process that is a journey. And hopefully that is empowering, that to recognize that you don't have to wait to have this. wherever are at right now, you are making that choice, and even by making that choice, are putting yourself on that journey. But at the same point, you're there right now, but it's only going to get better from here as well. Ideally,
Yeah.
that when you're doing it right, that even and it's important to point out here too that I think that there will be setbacks, almost perhaps necessarily when we get to this in our next point when we're connecting this with entrepreneurship and some of the lessons here, but there is a real way in which the best learning does come from failure. So I think it's important to
Right.
stress to everyone that, it doesn't always have to feel rosy, that there's probably going to be moments that feel more like dips, but that the part of even choosing to make this an ideal is recognizing that anything that is a quote unquote failure, if you take the failure as a lesson on your path of continuous betterment, then you're still on that path.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thought I had is you were making this point of why I think it's empowering and noble, therefore, in its universality, is particularly vis-a-vis our product of philosophical liberalism and politics promoting a free society. We often do think of the youth as being the driving force and energy for, kind of new social and political movements, revolutionary spirit, etc., the new ideas, the energy to carry them forth, the passion of a world that lies still largely before them rather than behind them, and that therefore is open to shaping more, you know. But, I think this notion again of the value of wisdom, accumulated experience, and growth, it helps rebalance those scales again, well, really just balanced, where perhaps it might have been more imbalanced. It rebalances the scales to both give, inv invite and give the opportunity for people across generations to be equally as engaged and passionate and involved. And it also calls, I think, to the responsibility as well for the elders, I'll say, with all due respect, to play a more proactive role in shaping that as well. Um, and and I also think it's critical to giving giving elder generations a sense of a continued purpose and mission, because even just in our culture today, the concept of retirement, kind of, it's in the word retire, right? It kind of promotes this notion, like you said, that you kind of plateau and then you kind of gradually fall off a cliff, or right off into the sunset, so to speak. But, I think, and I think many human beings actually struggle with that when they actually get there, because that ideal, if you will, doesn't really ask much of them. In fact, it kind of posits the alternative, which is to just kind of sit back and just let time pass until it takes you. And so I think this ideal hopefully can even be inspiring for people in their later years in life to pick up that call to continuous growth, learning, and betterment. So to me, these are just more reasons of why this is an ideal that is so noble, because it applies to everybody, everywhere, all the time, if you will. And it gives, I think, newfound purpose, constantly renewing purpose to everybody in their life, no matter where they're at. And like you said, it's both a state of being and a ongoing process. So it's just something that you can always be engaged in. And I think I touched upon it before, but just inherently that part, I like how you put it, that building virtuous character, it's one way of growth among many, but it's so important that we call it out as a key part of continuous betterment. And that just, I think, is inherently noble, right? It's in the terms, of morality, and trying to live a life that is aligned with the values you're seeking, and building the types of character that challenges you, but that holds you to high standards. These are all reasons to answer our kind of overriding question of the night of why this ideal is so noble. And so, and why we highlight the virtue building piece of it, because in many ways, you can think of virtues as the actions you need to achieve all your life goals. And if the main goal is continuous growth, self-actualization, and then ultimately transcendence, then you need certain actions and habits of character in mind in order to get that. And we will argue, and our list is going to flesh out at least one path of what those look like, or one subset of virtues that as you'll see, really just are so inspiring um and just enlightening, uplifting, whatever the right word is to use here, but that just really kind of call us to our best, if you will.
I think you're setting up a teaser for when we get to the virtues of how we're going to see that virtue is going to be like freedom, the way we've described freedom as being both a means and an end. And we're going to see
Yep.
virtue has that similar pattern of being both a means and an end. You need the virtues, you need certain kinds of actions to get started, but ultimately it leads to a kind of end in itself. And then it's this beautiful spiraling. I also wanted to point out the way I see, in terms of the political project, I see this as the ultimate integration of harnessing the best of that youthful energy with the important insights from wisdom and experience. Because we can see certainly
Mm,
ways that history have gone wrong. And the clear example that comes to mind is Mao's communist China, where it was precisely against all of the old. They wanted the revolution precisely to
mm,
dismantle everything that had existed beforehand. And while you and I would certainly agree that we want to have progress, we also want to retain the best of the learnings that have come from before. So it's why our whole project is 1776 forward. And it's both of these. It's
right.
recognizing the value of what has come from the past, what the fruits of what we have learned, the fruits of the flourishing of our growth. We want to retain all of that and
Hmm.
then bring it to the future and make it even better. And that's what I see is what this project allows, that we get to have all of that youthful energy that is forward looking and excited for what we can make happen in the future. Because as far as I'm concerned, there is no retirement. My whole personal life goal is to never retire. We're going to get here in a second
Yeah.
when we talk about entrepreneurship. It's perhaps ways of thinking about how my work might develop, and of course, it's recognizing that certainly physically, biologically, there are things in the body that change and do decay. But we also know now there's so much biological technology that's available to keep us with more energy and vigor. A whole longevity project, certain
Hmm.
futurists who think about kind of reaching a point where perhaps human beings never have to die. Could be a whole conversation we could get into. But even if you took as inevitable that there might be some kind of physical and or mental decay that comes from the aging process, that what continuous betterment as an ideal helps us focus on is the ways in which, even as perhaps parts of yourself are decaying, that there is always still this possibility to find where there is growth that's available to you that you can then choose to focus on and still have that aspect of growth that's going on, no matter how
Mm.
aging might be happening. And then hopefully it does empower this beautiful integration of keeping this youthful, forward looking excitement toward building a better future that you get to be a part of and a contributor to, while bringing the best of your accumulated wisdom as you progress through more and more decades.
I love that. And I think that's a great setup then and segue to the second half of our question, which is then how do we connect this to entrepreneurship, or how does this ideal relate to the concept of entrepreneurship? Again, for those of you who are new and just kind of tuning in, entrepreneurship is a key theme of our work here, both not only because Joy and I are both entrepreneurs in our own right, in our kind of day jobs, if you will, but also because, and maybe perhaps because of that experience, we see the parallels to the political project. We want to bring a lot of the benefits of the entrepreneurial spirit and method to the project of building better governance and society, political societies. So it's constantly on our mind, and we look to see where there are overlaps and parallels. So, and this one in particular, I think we do see a lot of them. So, Joy, I know you had some good thoughts on that. Maybe I'll let you kind of kick this part of it off.
I'll start even by echoing the importance of bringing this entrepreneurial spirit to what it is that we're doing. And I've heard it said that entrepreneurship is the best personal development project that one
Hmm.
could take on. Entrepreneurship and parenting, perhaps both of those
Ah,
that have been put forward as the best personal development projects one could take on. And when you think about it, you even see the similarity that it's about taking responsibility for essentially this nascent thing and bringing it into its own kind of autonomous fruition. And by being the steward of that, makes you come face to face with all of your limitations and calls on the best of you to bring out your responsibility, your resilience, and precisely a commitment to continuous growth. Because in order for you to grow either your business project or your little child human, you yourself have to become the best version of yourself to do that in the best possible way. And I personally have experienced this myself in entrepreneurship, that as I see it, that my entrepreneurship journey, this is what it's always been about. That the goal of being an entrepreneur is continuous betterment. It might be something that you measure in the most basic metric of revenue or income generated, that you're always trying to grow more and more. But I found even beyond perhaps that particular metric, there's metrics of, even if you're generating the same revenue, are you having greater impact? Are you having the same revenue and impact, but doing it in processes that sustain you and your employees in a better way? So that there's so many different facets of continuous betterment in the entrepreneurship journey, but that it's always about trying to do it better, whichever one of these aspects of the entrepreneurship container that you're looking at, that the goal is always, how can I do this better? And it brings you face to face with your limitations, with your flaws, with the things that hold you back, with your limiting beliefs. And there is this process of having to work through those in order to be the best entrepreneur that you can be in service of the business that you are creating. And I want to share too, I think the importance of it's common parlance in entrepreneurship to recognize that failure is part of the process, because it is through failure that we learn. And I think that is such a key insight for thinking about continuous betterment, for thinking about growth, for thinking about learning, that it's not always sunshine and puppy dogs and roses, that there are going to be moments that feel awful, or in the moment are awful, but that you have this capacity to choose to see. One of the ways I love to have heard this framed is that a mistake is only a missed take. It's just one take on what you've done that didn't go quite right. And if you can gather the lesson from that, then it's never really a failure. And that the lesson is what puts you back on this path of continuous betterment, and not just wallowing in that moment of whatever that failure might have been. Uh, You're on mute.
wow, I was talking to myself. I was just saying, yeah, wow, very, very powerful and well said. So many thoughts there. Um, yeah, I think it's like you said that entrepreneurship is, and for those of you who haven't heard our riffs on entrepreneurship in the past, we kind of define it as any any type of mission-driven endeavor. It's not only kind of profit-seeking businesses, but any type of mission-driven endeavor where you're bringing a novel idea or insight to solving a human problem or need in the real world. So that's just a plug that our vision of entrepreneurship is all encompassing. But obviously, business is the primary expression of this spirit because business's primary objective is to solve practical human problems, bringing, kind of bringing to bear science, technology, and kind of human effort, to create to solve the problem and create progress. So in that sense, it really is kind of the best expression of the spirit, and that's at least the world both of Joy and I come from. So that's what we're going to draw from a lot too. But I think that's key because I like how you said it that you know, business or entrepreneur, any entrepreneurial endeavor writ large, it is about constant growth. And you use the example of like always growing revenue and profits. That is at root the primary objective of any entrepreneurial enterprise. And I think that is an amazing, beautiful thing because it is the very expression of this continuous betterment impulse and possibility. Yes, it also comes from just the greed impulse, but to not to kind of paraphrase Michael Douglas in Wall Street, but that greed impulse is really ultimately the impulse to make your life better and to grow the values in your life that that's what underlies it all. So it is good in that sense. And I would argue it's not about accumulating money so that you can Scrooge McDuck take a dive into your pile of gold coins. The impulse even to grow revenues, profits, activity, impact is about that. How do we solve these problems and help more people to impact the world better, to make more progress? That, I would argue, being a businessman and having dealt with most businessmen and just seeing how our world has evolved and hearing all the other businessmen talk about what really motivates them, that's the real drive. And so I think that is the continuous betterment spirit in action, kind of at the kind of global level of entrepreneurship or the societal level, to use your framing. But then at the individual level as well, I think continuous betterment connects so well to entrepreneurship for all the reasons you kind of went through. You kind of stole my thunder a little bit. I was going to really emphasize that failure part, but to me, it's more about, I guess, and I liked how you invoked the mistakes equals mistakes piece, because to me, failure is is really just, I think of it as like trial and erroring. It's experimenting. You're just seeing what works and what doesn't, and then you're just learning from that. And it's like almost like you have your computer board or your control board where you're calibrating the dials and everything until you get that right combination of knowledge, skills, effort, teamwork, talent, all the components that go into whatever endeavor it is you're engaged in and trying whatever problem you're trying to solve. That's all. When it doesn't go work out, that to me is just one experiment that you then try again. There's the famous story of Edison, who basically tried 10,000 different combinations before he got the right one for the light bulb. And was asked many times, I'm paraphrasing here and I'm probably gonna horribly butcher it, but he was asked many times, like, did you feel like a failure? Did you ever feel like giving up? And the fact that it took you 10,000 times to get here. And he was like, no, it was just, those were those were 9,999 times where I just, I missed it or didn't have the right, he framed it as exactly that every failure was just another trial on his experiment. And that, I will just admit, even in my own entrepreneurial journey, that was one of the hardest lessons to accept, was because I think unfortunately we grow up despite living in a very capitalist or quasi-capitalist, very pro-entrepreneurial culture, I think for the average person, you're not taught that failure is a good thing or a way to learn and become better. You're taught that you shouldn't do it, that don't make mistakes, that it's kind of that there's this incorrect and I would argue, you know, not only impossible, but a kind of negative ideal of perfection. We won't go down the full rabbit hole of that. That's a conversation for another time. But people don't really get this idea of failure as a learning process. It's something to be avoided. And I certainly and had internalized that in my career in the corporate world. And it took me actually experiencing some failures in my career on in that world, which coincided with me already starting to go on my own entrepreneurial journey, kind of coincident with it, to start to unlearn the bad lessons and relearn these new ones. And I think that even itself is a beautiful demonstration of how entrepreneurship in particular forces you, like you said, to face your fears, your weaknesses, your growth areas, and to deal with them if you want to grow and achieve your goals and solve the problem that you have set for yourself. So yeah, those are just all that's what I would add to this question of how and why does continuous betterment relate to entrepreneurship, or how are they kind of very, very good symbols and manifestations of each other.
I appreciate how you've essentially even now brought us full circle to thinking about how this ideal of continuous betterment relates to the ideal of creator trader. Because to your point, if one is greedy in a predator prey system where it is a winner loser situation, that that's horrible because your greed means that every time you win, somebody else loses. But the beauty of the entrepreneurial system is the creator trader ideal, where it is that we're building win-win or win-win-win situations. And when we're operating through that archetype, then there is this beautiful phenomenon that happens, that as you become better and better and you win at your endeavor, that's just more winning for the world. Because if you win at solving your problem in your business, well, now that's a problem that's solved for all the people that your business impacts. And if you win and now you've made a bunch of money, you're not going to be Scrooge McDuck and just hoard it away to so you can use it as a pool. You're going to take that money and invest it so it can now do its work to fuel more wins, hopefully by more entrepreneurial individuals who are solving more problems. And again, this is how we get that ultimate uh, growth trajectory as of humanity, of
Of humanity.
progressing
Yeah,
upward, even through the individual dips and failures that might be happening there along the
sure.
way.
Yeah, wonderful.
So why
So
don't we then transition to what the call to action is for this session?
agreed. So, in the spirit of continuous betterment, we have it's a couple parts here. There's a reflection and then an action part here. So, our call to action is in the spirit of continuous betterment to start off by surveying your own life and look at areas where you feel that you're growing and areas where you feel maybe you aren't growing so much in life, and just sit with it. What does that feel like? Kind of what maybe insights come up from thinking about that and even just identifying your life and the various domains in this way, the growth, not growth kind of paradigm. And and then beyond that, then envision, imagine, project what for the areas you identified where you feel you're not growing, what that would look like if you were, what the flip side of that would be. So that's kind of the first part. And then the action part would be pick one of those areas where you felt that you weren't growing and or have flatlined, declined, kind of not anything other than growth feels like continuous betterment. Pick one of those and then pick one concrete action you can take in the next 2 weeks to shift that domain, that part of your life back to a growth trajectory. So that is our call to action. And I know I'm going to be doing it in my life. It's as we've said, especially both of us being entrepreneurs, we are definitely on the continuous betterment path daily, both in our personal and creative lives. But I am always looking for new opportunities to even more proactively and consciously practice it and be in that mindset. So I particularly like this one.
And I think that connects it even to our previous episode, thinking about the self-chosen life. Here we're really asking you to choose more, to become more conscious of where you can choose better. And I think there's even a beautiful parallel. We've framed many of these in terms of self-leadership and community leadership, and here too the focus perhaps really is more on self-leadership with this one, because we're asking you to think about a particular aspect of your individual growth. But I'm sure that as you think about it, you might even want to think about the ramifications of what will it have for the community, either your immediate surrounding family and friends and the world as a whole, that as you become this more actualized, improved version of yourself, how that can have beautiful ripple effects for the rest of humanity. And then it sets us up for our next episode as well, where we're going to be exploring the Renaissance human ideal.
That's right. You took the words right out of my mouth because as we start to think about our life comprising so many different domains and areas of value, and then hoping to get as many of them as possible and ultimately all of them in a growth trajectory, that starts to put us in this framework of the Renaissance human ideal, which is all about a panoply of values and endeavors and life kind of dimensions, if you will. So, more to come on that, but that's just a sneak preview of our next episode coming up.
And maybe we'll let them know we're even going to see some visions of Italy in this one because
That
of
is
Chris's
correct.
travels.
Yes, we are. So, looking forward to it. All right, we will see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks as always for the time, and thank you, Joya, for a great conversation.
Yep. See you then.